So first topic, obviously, the homelessness situation. I mean, I know you've done a lot of work in terms of adding shelter beds, adding permanent housing, over the past few years. But at the same time, the situation on the streets just keeps mushrooming in terms of the number of tents everywhere. Obviously, with COVID, that played into just letting people be over the past few months. But at this point, I mean, what's the plan moving forward? Because you've gotten so much pushback from the public, from businesses downtown saying, look, we need people off the streets. People are not coming down for many reasons. It's another reason we're not getting business, we're not getting traffic. People are leaving, businesses are leaving. Is there any immediate plan to get tents off the streets?
The answer is yes, there is an immediate plan. I've obviously engaged with my partners at Multnomah County and the Home for Everyone Coalition and made it really clear that my top priority right now is getting people off the streets, off the sidewalks, out of the doorways, off of the public right-of-ways, and into a humane alternative. And long-term, we know that that's housing. And the city has invested heavily alongside the county on permanent supportive housing and low-income housing. But we have a crisis right now. And right now, I believe shelter, a place where people can put a roof over their heads, they have access to sanitation, to water, they have the opportunity to connect to services. That is a far better and more humane option than letting them be on the sidewalks. Moreover, I am hearing loudly and clearly, not just from business owners, but also from people who work for businesses downtown in particular, and people who are customers to those businesses, that they just do not feel safe running the gauntlet of tent after tent after tent on the sidewalk. So there's a win-win here if we can open more space and get more people off the sidewalks. And so I've directed my city staff to give me 300 new shelter beds in the near term. We just found 100 over at the Charles Jordan Center. That's a facility it's a city-owned facility that's closed due to COVID. We should be putting people inside there. And I'm going to be reaching out to other governments, the school districts, and others to find additional space to bring people in off the streets.
When you say school districts, in what way?
Well, the schools obviously don't have people in those facilities right now. We're in the COVID crisis. There's a lot of public facilities that are sitting there empty at a time when, because of COVID, we have a record number of people on our sidewalks. So obviously, we've got a problem that we can connect with a potential solution, at least in the near term. So why wouldn't we do
that? Do you expect to see visually a change in the next couple of months of what we're seeing on the streets in terms of people camping?
Look, the public is expecting it. It doesn't take a genius to walk outside your front door and see that we have a crisis in terms of the number of people living on our streets. It's not humane. It's not an effective solution. It's not something that any of us should want. So we have to work better together as a community, the city, with our partners at the county, with our state partners and others, to get people off of the sidewalks. And while we've done really good work over the last couple of years, we have not focused relentlessly on shelter and getting people off the sidewalks in the near term. There's been a legitimate concern about long-term housing, but we've got a crisis before us right now, today, in terms of the number of people on the streets. And we have to do whatever we can to get them off the streets into a humane alternative. And for me, that means additional shelter beds.
What about the idea of organized camps, like what's set up over in Southeast, close in that, the industrial district? Are those being considered? Would those be possible?
Yeah, and I've changed my viewpoint on this. When I took office, I was 100% opposed to additional managed campsites because I really believed having people in a tent is not the best and highest strategy for addressing homelessness. But we have opened these managed camps. We've opened 3 of them since the beginning of the COVID crisis, and they've been very effective. So I am open to that strategy, and we're talking to folks in various neighborhoods, and we're talking to others who own pieces of underutilized property to see if there aren't options for other managed camps. I think it's appropriate given the size and the scale of the problem we're facing.
Turning to another topic, the nightly protests, more than 100 nights so far and counting. Most of them violent at some point. What's the plan moving forward to figure out how to end them? In other words, one of the biggest issues we keep hearing is negotiation, having people come to the table, trying to figure out some parties who might be willing to step in to work on that. What is the plan? In other words, obviously people have their right to free speech, but at the same time, there's the violence that has been going on. How do you get that to end? I mean, are you looking at some different alternatives, different ways of doing that?
Law enforcement have tried different strategies, from having no presence to a minimal presence to having an overwhelming presence. And so far, this has stymied federal, state, county, and Portland law enforcement. And so there's really only two things that I think are going to work here. Number one, for those who are engaged in violence or criminal destruction, we have to arrest them and we have to convict them. We have to hold them accountable. So that's the police arresting people who are engaged in these activities, having the district attorney have a strong enough case from the police that they can actually convict those individuals, and then having the courts hold them accountable. We want to keep those folks separated and distinct from the nonviolent demonstrators whose First Amendment rights we're sworn to uphold and protect. That's something that's very important to us in this city. But right now, what we need to do is keep those two distinct groups separate. We have to make a strong case, and we have to hold those who are engaged in violence accountable. And to that end, what I've directed the police bureau to do, and what they're doing, is they're adding additional resources to their investigative units. And we're working with the district attorney to make sure that those who are engaged in the most egregious cases are held accountable. We are also demonstrating through the work that I'm doing, the work I'm doing with my colleagues on the city council and others at the state legislature, that we understand the moment, that people, they don't necessarily want less policing or less public safety. They want better police, better public safety in our hiring, in our retention, in our training, in our directives, in our de-escalation strategies. And we've got to prove to the public that we're serious about it and that we are actually changing things when it comes to law enforcement.
Have you had any conversations with the DA indicating that he will change his stance on who he prosecutes?
You know, I've been pleasantly surprised by Mike Schmidt as the district attorney. I was a little bit worried about some of the rhetoric that came in with the campaign, but he has done exactly what he told me he would do. He's looking at each of these issues on a case-by-case basis. He's made some very prominent indictments. So I think he's doing what he needs to do to support the Portland police and our state police partners in helping to hold people accountable.
On the flip side of that, there's a lot of concern among the public about police accountability, how police have handled themselves in these situations where they have tear gassed or maced or with physical force assaulted individuals who were not involved in a situation but were caught up in this. What about accountability on the police end?
It's critically important. And those individuals who call for increased police accountability, they're also right. There have been egregious cases where I believe the police have overreacted. The tactics they've engaged in some cases have not de-escalated, but perhaps have in fact inflamed the situation. Attacks on the press, attacks on innocent bystanders, all of those things have led to increased animosity and a lack of trust in local and state policing. And so I've put my plan out of the 19 reforms I proposed. About 11 or 12 of them are currently completed or in process. We worked with the state legislature and the POC caucus to pass further reforms, and we have a lot more work to do. But we must hold the police accountable to the directives and the standards and the expectations that the public sets forth. That's absolutely critically important to rebuilding the trust.
On the issue of housing, there has been the rent moratorium that's been going on for some time, but at some point the rent will be due, which will be thousands of dollars for individuals, for families. They won't be able to pay. At the same time, landlords need that, want that money to pay their mortgages. What happens to prevent possibly hundreds of people, hundreds or thousands of people being evicted?
So in this country, we have two ways of thinking about it, both of which are wrong. Number one, we tend to focus unilaterally on tenant protections. That's really helpful in the near term, but we end up losing housing and housing providers at the local level who then cannot pay their mortgages or their bills. And then on the other side, Congress tends to focus on bailing out the banks. That doesn't help us at the local level, and it doesn't help tenants stay in their housing. The best and highest use of money to keep people in their housing and to ensure that we maintain local suppliers of low income and affordable housing is through rent assistance. That keeps people in their units, and it also helps landlords and building owners and operators pay their bills and pay their mortgage. And so I was really happy to see the city and the county put the lion's share of our CARE dollars into rent assistance. We put $35 million into rent assistance. We made an additional $12 million available through grants. And there's other things that we've done for direct household support to the tune of $8 million, but it's a drop in the bucket. By October 1st, we expect there to be a rent gap of between $120 and $125 million. So the 50 or 60 we've put in only covers about half the problem. So I'm continuing to work with our state legislators and our federal office holders to make sure that there are additional resources available here. And I would argue that the best and highest use of any $1 going into the system right now has to go into rent support. That's the easiest and most effective way for us to solve this crisis.
Focusing on downtown Portland, it's their money-making season coming up with retail, the holiday shopping season as it's called. There are so many people who are locals, who are out-of-towners, who are not going to downtown Portland between the boarded up buildings, concern about COVID, concern about violence. How do you turn that around quickly?
There is no quick way of doing it, to be honest with you. It's the dog work of governance. It's about going methodically. Number one, end the violence. Number two, clean up the city. And so I've put forth a proposal to my colleagues on the city council to greatly step up both litter collection and graffiti abatement throughout the downtown core, Old Town Chinatown, the I-405 loop. And then the next part is having businesses feel confident and comfortable that they can reopen, that their employees can come downtown and not be subjected to nightly violence or not be subjected to some of the livability issues we've got on our streets. And the city has to lead. And so we'll be taking our boards off of City Hall soon. We will be opening in compliance with the restrictions under COVID. We're seeing a number of businesses already opening up and operating successfully downtown. And then we need to work with the business community to get the word out to people, both locally and nationally, that Portland is open for business, that it's a great place to come to shop, to do business. But first, before any of that can happen, we've got to end the violence, and we've got to clean up the downtown area, and government needs to lead by cleaning our buildings off first, taking our boards down first, and bringing our employees back first, and showing people that it can be done safely. And that's what we're going to do.
But if you get the reaction and destruction once again, as soon as it comes down, what happens at that point?
Well, you know, that is always a risk. And again, my expectation is if people damage public buildings, those are taxpayer funded buildings. That property belongs to the people who pay taxes here, and we will hold them accountable. And my recommendation to the DA would not only be that we prosecute them, but we also make them pay for it, because that damage adds up over time.
Last question for you. A lot of big issues. It's a job I think a lot of people would say they wouldn't want. You face a lot of criticism, sharp criticism often. Why do you want to do this for another 4 years?
That's a great question, and it's one I get asked every day. And it's not one I can necessarily smoothly answer, except to say, I knew it would be like this. And it's not a job. If it were a job, I'd be taking a salary. This is a calling. I believe that government can be a force for great good in the world. It's something that I've studied and I've advocated for many, many years. I believe I have the ability to bring solutions to complex problems. And maybe in this day and age, one of the main reasons I want to stick around beyond December is I believe I can bridge some of the divides that are separating us nationally and locally. That's the way I do things. I find that elusive center. I bring people together to get things done. And I know that the people who support me know that I'm capable of doing that. And they want to see the divides come to an end. They want to see our city, our state, our nation unified again, perhaps more than anything else. And to do that, we need leaders who can bring people together rather than divide us. And I'm a leader who can bring people together. I've proven that time and time again.
Mayor, thank you. Thanks for the time. I appreciate it.